And happy Saturday and welcome to the deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. It is Saturday, June the 18th, 2022, and we're so happy you're in with us today. We got a special show today. We're going to talk about Juneteenth. We're going to talk about the hearings before the Select Committee on 1-6, and we're going to talk about Father's Day. In the second segment, got a really special guest. Got to stick around for Reverend Lynette Patterson of Reedy Chapel AME Zion Church in Galveston, Texas. And why Reedy Chapel is so important, that's the place where they hung the Emancipation Proclamation on the door for people in Galveston to know that they were free. So Juneteenth started at Reedy Chapel. It went from the town hall to Reedy Chapel. And there's a reenactment every year of reading the Emancipation Proclamation. So in the second segment, Reverend Lynette Patterson is going to give us some of her time. And we're so excited that she's going to be in. But in the meantime, guess who's here? It's Val Atkinson. Hey, Val.
Oh, Ed.
Val, I'm really excited about that second segment. Reverend Patterson is going to be able to give us about 15, 20 minutes to talk about, Galveston. So we'll save that for now. In the intro, though, there were a lot of clips from the 1-6 Select Committee on the insurrection, attempted coup, whatever you want to call it. And what struck me, Val, is in the first clip we saw Benny Thompson, talking about, what this is about, or what the hearings are supposed to be about Donald Trump and his attempt to hoodoo everybody into thinking that there was some other way that he could hold on to power other than the regular electoral process. And I want to start there today. Val, what's problematic here is that we were able to even get to that point. And we were talking about it a little bit before we came on about we're in trouble in the United States. And we may not even know how much trouble we're in, that this 1-6 insurrection attempt exposes a lot of things. Let's start there. What's your first impression, not of the 1-6 committee hearings and all that first, but where we are in America and where we stand in our stability as a government to begin with?
Well, we're in a bad place, Ed. We're not in a good place, as you alluded to. Our problem is, in my opinion, that we have walked into a circumstance, a situation that we have given all of our attention and process over to something called a preponderance of the evidence and waiting for the accused to admit guilt. And as we used to say in the old Andy Griffith days, unlock the jail cell, go in, lock yourself up, and throw the key back out. That's how we have become accustomed to dealing with people that violated the law, or violated the spirit of the law. Donald Trump was one of the first that came along to understand this and realize that if you just refuse to give in, if you refuse to say, I'm guilty, if you refuse to cooperate, you create all kinds of problems for this system we're talking about. Because now they have to have irrefutable evidence that you did exactly what they are claiming you did. They're not gonna, guys like Trump are not gonna help us out by saying, okay, that's a big piece of evidence there. I'll concede to the rest of it and we can just move on forward. That's not the way it works anymore. You have to prove without a shadow of a doubt that this man or these people did exactly what you are accusing them of doing. And that's why Donald Trump is causing so much problem, because he's been doing this all of his life. He didn't just start doing this in 2015. His whole life has been about the business of saying things that people will understand what he means without having to actually say the words himself. Therefore, he can get before a legal setting, before a court, and say, no, I didn't mean that. That wasn't my understanding. That's not what I meant. That's not what I said. And we're trying to catch up with this type of individual because we hadn't have to deal with anybody like this before. We dealt with people who knew when they had had enough and they pulled a Richard Nixon and they resigned.
Well, I'm glad you bring that up because on yesterday, the 17th, was the anniversary of the break-in at the Watergate. And it was discovered by a brother who went in and saw that they were trying to break into the Watergate complex, and we know what the end result of that was. You know, and there were a lot of people from North Carolina tied into those hearings on Watergate, Sam Irving and Rufus Edmonston and people like that, and even a young Hillary Clinton was a part of the hearings that went on to deal with Watergate. Are there any historical? You said that Donald Trump is not oldest to drunk from Andy Griffith. He's not going to lock himself up. We know that, and he's not even a Richard Nixon, who also has a connection to North Carolina, who went to Duke University. But on a serious note, what is there anything at all that we could learn from Watergate? What are we doing wrong or different about this that happened in Watergate? Or is it that there has to be Republicans who fix this, right? Because I'm thinking about in Watergate, what happened? Republicans went up to Nixon and told him he had to go, right? But there are no Republicans. There's only 2 on this select committee. Is there any heart from any Republican to do anything at all here?
I'm not sure, Ed. Right now, I would say no, because it can't be just any Republican. It can't be Cheney or Gensler or any of those kind of people. Remember, it was Goldwater, Senator Goldwater, who walked up to Nixon and said, "You only have 5 votes in the Senate, and mine is not one of them." And that told him that he was dead. He had already been impeached in the House. And when the trial opened up in the Senate, basically what Goldwater is saying, you got 95 votes against you. We only need 60 and you're out. So that told him he had to do something. We are nowhere near that. We are nowhere near Deep Throat, the guy who gave Woodward all of the information that was given. We're nowhere near John Dean, the person on the inside who finally got religion and turned over information and became cooperative with the prosecutors and that sort of thing. We don't have a Alexander Butterfield, who was in charge of the taping system within the White House that nobody knew about. We don't have that. And there is no 18-minute gap there on the tape. So there are just tons of things that happen in Watergate that we don't have in this piece here. If I were a betting man, Ed, and I'd have to bet the farm, I would bet on the side that says there may be people going to jail, spending significant time, but it won't be the top of the ticket. I don't expect to see Donald Trump in a orange jumpsuit doing perk walk like you talk about.
You keep hurting my feelings, Val. I've been waiting for it. You keep telling me it ain't gonna happen. I don't know.
It's not gonna happen because one of the real reasons, Ed, is that we are still building a case for this thing called the American experiment. We're still trying to show the rest of the world that this is the best country ever devised by man. Nobody has ever come anywhere close, and nobody ever will. So everything about us has to be on the up and ups, has to be perfect, has to be better than best.
Yeah.
So if that's the case, if that's the measurement, how do you talk about your number one person in the world, the president of the United States, going to jail? That's not a sign of a good republic, that you got to put your number one guy in jail. So the last thing they want to do, when I said they, I'm talking about your friend, Merrick Garland, he's included here too. The last thing they want to do is indict and convict and incarcerate the president of the
A
United
former
States.
president of the United
They
States. Yeah,
don't,
that's
they don't want to have to do that. The other thing is, which is just as damning, they don't want to indict him, go to a trial, and have him to be acquitted. That's just like saying he's been right all along. He was perfectly proper in everything he's done. That's even worse. They're not going to trial at all. So with those kinds of setups, you're right, Ed, we're in a bad place.
Yeah, well, the only good place you are is right now you're watching The Deal or you're listening to it on the podcast. You can hear us on Spotify, Anchor, all the usual places that you can get podcasts. Please do that. You can also go to the website. There's a picture of the website there, thedealwithedclark.com. Please go there and you can subscribe on YouTube. You can look at us on Facebook, all these different places. Val, also as a programming note, in the next segment, after we take a break, Reverend Lynette Patterson from Reedy Chapel AME Church is going to be in with us. I need for you guys to stick around for that because Juneteenth is on Sunday, the 19th. And the reason why we have Juneteenth is because of Reedy Chapel AME Church in Galveston, Texas. So we went straight to Galveston and got the source. And Reverend Patterson is going to be on with us in the next segment. Val, one last thing before we take a break. I want you to watch a clip of Judge Ludwig, who was supposed to be, I guess, the star witness yesterday. And I'm not going to say anything because everybody didn't see this because we're the only dummies that were sitting around watching the hearings. But tell me, what are we seeing here? Obviously, he had good information, but let's talk about his delivery. Let's watch this clip.
The foundational truth is the rule of law. That foundational truth is, for the United States of America, the profound truth. But it's not merely the profound truth for the United States. It's also the simple truth.
Okay, Val. So his bona fides is not in dispute. He is a conservative. He's a former federal judge. He knows a lot, blah, 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 blah. But I don't know anybody who hasn't said anything about his delivery. Talk to me real quick about whether or not that set back the hearing or whether or not, even though he had something very vital to say, was it as off-putting to you as it was to me, his delivery?
Yeah, his delivery took away a lot from what they were trying to do. My question is, Ed, who made the final decision to have him on the program and have him to take up that particular segment? Is there any other way that the information could have been disseminated without having him up there slow walking between sentences and syllabus and all of those kinds of things? I just don't think it was appropriate for this venue, for this particular circumstance, as important as the 1-6 committee hearings are. You don't need any distractions at all. We got enough problems. And that's what he was. He was a distraction. I'm not sure what his medical conditions are right now. I won't even venture to guess. but he is challenged, let me say this way, in terms of his ability to make presentations, his ability to communicate. He is challenged. And I think somebody did a disservice to whatever they were trying to do with having him on board.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, it's no doubt that the information he gave, which is he advised Mike Pence that and his staff that there is no way in the world that anything that the Trump folks were saying was constitutional, and that they needed to abandon that whole argument. And he, at the end of his presentation, he even said that it would have been tantamount to a revolution. I would go further and say, no, it was a coup, just like we all think it was. It was a try to overthrow the government. Hey, Val, I hear some music, so that means we need to take a break. When we come back, Reverend Lynette Patterson is going to be with us, and she's going to be from Galveston, Texas, and she's going to be from Reedy Chapel AME Church, the church where the Emancipation Proclamation was nailed to the door, and where today or tomorrow, the 19th, Juneteenth, the 19th, there'll be a parade and all that, and she'll talk about that when we get back. So stay right there. We'll be right back after this message.
So Juneteenth is one of those holidays that start out from the bottom up. It starts out because people in Texas start celebrating it. They remember the stories about what happened in this little place in Galveston, right outside of Houston, Texas, where on June 19th or thereabout, on that day, the Union Army arrives in Galveston, Texas, and they read the Emancipation Proclamation to a bunch of people who are living on these islands outside of Galveston, and who may not have heard that the war was over. So we had an army there arriving in Galveston, Texas on June 19th with some African-American soldiers. 6,000 African-American soldiers were with the Ranger when he showed up there on June 19th. So it's something worth celebrating. It was being celebrated locally by those people in Texas for many years. It spreads to Oklahoma, it spreads to Colorado and some of those Midwestern states. And eventually Dr. Myers puts together a national organization, and he comes knocking on my door here in Washington, D.C. and says, I need you to help me. We need to get this thing passed to Congress. And of course, we do what we can here to help him get it passed. And he didn't live long enough to see it get passed to Congress, but last year, Congress finally passed the bill, and President Biden signs into law the Juneteenth celebration day.
And welcome back to our second segment of the deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. That's Val Atkinson. And as I told you before, we were going to have a special guest, the Reverend Lynette Patterson of Reedy Chapel Church in Galveston, Texas. And the reason why I went to Galveston to find somebody is because it's Juneteenth. And like we talked about in the first segment, Val, Juneteenth is such an important thing. And we had been talking about it for years, but few people knew about Juneteenth. And now it's a federal holiday and a lot of people will be off work. But I want Reverend Patterson to tell me, and welcome to the deal, Reverend Patterson, about how important Juneteenth is to Galveston, Texas. I don't know if people understand that, and I thought maybe you could help us with that.
Well, sure, and thank you for having me on today. Juneteenth is very important to the Black community here in Galveston for a number of reasons. Because it brings unity to those that are of color. This is a time of year when churches across denominations come together to celebrate and to recognize the Emancipation Proclamation that was read on the courthouse steps. For Reedy Chapel, Juneteenth is important because the proclamation was posted on our doorstep, right on our church door. And the enslaved, when they learned that they were free, they marched back to Reedy Chapel to have worship and to have prayer. And so Reedy Chapel is truly one of the first places that Juneteenth was celebrated on the island of Galveston. But it means a lot to the people here because for so long, for 2 years after the slaves were freed, people in Texas were still in bondage, had no idea that they were free. And so they were free, the freedom had come, but for those in Texas, they had not been told that they were free. And so it's almost Juneteenth in Galveston is almost like the 4th of July for others.
Yeah, Reverend Patterson, I've actually been in Galveston for Juneteenth. I was there during Hurricane Ike. I was the public information officer for FEMA for about 9 months. And one of the things that struck me is that Galvestonians were proud of all of the accomplishments that African Americans had made. Reedy Chapel was the first AME church, I believe.
That's correct.
Where in Texas. And I attended service there a number of times. There's a lot of famous Black folks from Galveston, and we just talked about Juneteenth. But one of the things that disturbed me, I saw an article in the Houston Chronicle yesterday about the diminishing population of African Americans in Galveston. Can you talk some about how Galveston is changing and what the impact will be? Not just to Juneteenth, but to the culture of Galveston. Galveston is a very unique place, and I hope people get a chance to visit there.
Well, all across the country and everywhere, gentrification is taking place. People are now wanting to live in areas that they had not wanted to live in before. People want to be a part of community that they had not wanted to be a part of in the past. And so what you're finding is that gentrification is coming in and almost forcing African Americans to move or to go to other places. And so when things become so expensive that you can't afford it, or when your area is not given the attention that other areas are given, it leaves for people to migrate and go to other places. People are probably going a lot to Texas City because on the island, certain areas are not, how you say it, certain areas are not given that attention that other areas are given. So it is impacting the community. There's a lot of homeless here on the island. People just cannot afford it, especially, now with the prices of gas. Everything on the island is actually more expensive than it is, they call it, on the mainland. And so, matter of fact, I just got some gas. It was $5.99 a gallon, almost $6 a gallon, right here on the island. And so if you have people that are not able to demand the type of job that is able to give them the stability to compete or to move along with the rising costs, then you find that there's some equality.
Yeah, I want to remind the folks you're listening to Reverend Lynette Patterson of Reedy Chapel in Galveston, Texas. We're talking about Juneteenth, but we're also talking about the impact of lost population in Galveston and changing the gentrification. Val, as you listen to Reverend Patterson, I'm sure it provokes some questions in your mind about, since you're the historian here, and about how folks in Galveston learned about them being free, and Reverend Patterson mentioned that it was 2 years late. What does it make you think about when you hear Reverend Patterson now talking about how Galveston is changing and maybe lose some of that history?
Well, history is very, very important. You can't lose that or you lose yourself. So I jotted down a few things once I found out we were going to be talking to Reverend Patterson today. And I just wanted to remind folks through her that some of the dates surrounding Juneteenth could be confusing to some folk. And I wanted to make sure everybody understood how things work and how sequentially they fell out to become what they are. Let's go back to April of 1862. That's when there was an Emancipation Proclamation for the District of Columbia. That was the first one that most people are not aware of, just for DC itself. And then in August of that same year, August of 1862, President Lincoln proposed to his cabinet, let's do an Emancipation Proclamation for all of the states that are in rebellion. Everywhere, if you're in rebellion, these slaves are going to be free. And his cabinet talked him into holding off until there is a victory, because you got to understand, this is still during the Civil War. So let's wait until there is a victory, because we wouldn't want people to think that this is a way out and we're just singing our last swan song to try to keep from being defeated. So the Battle of Antietam came up in September. And of course, the history books have it that the Union won that. So they said, okay, let's go. So on the 22nd of September of that year, 62, that's when Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation on September the 22nd of 62. But it had an effective date of January the 1st of 63. That's when the Emancipation Proclamation was effective. If you were a slave in a place that was in rebellion against the United States of America, effective 1 January of 63, you were free. And they had to put it that way because we had 5 border states that had slaves. And we didn't want to free those slaves because they may have gone over to the Confederacy to keep their slaves. So the language was, if you're a slave in a state that's in rebellion against the United States of America, effective January 1st of 1863, you are free. Then we go down to March of 1864, and the Senate passes the 13th Amendment because Lincoln is thinking, you know, this Emancipation Proclamation thing is okay, but it's a military exigent. And after the war is over, we still may have problems here. So let's do a 13th Amendment. So the Senate passes it in March of 1864. And then in the following January of 1865, the House passes it. That's the movie Lincoln. That's what the movie Lincoln is about. It's about the House passing their version of the 13th Amendment. But then, of course, according to history, we are still, the 13th Amendment is still not law. It takes the ratification by the states. 3/4 of the states must ratify this. And they didn't do this until December the 6th of 1865 is when we had enough states to make up 3/4 of the states that ratified the 13th Amendment to make it law. And there are some people who wanted to make the celebration of the 13th Amendment a celebration of Juneteenth or Black History or whatever, the 6th of December. So if you ever heard people talking about the 6th of December, that's what they're talking about, because that's when the 13th Amendment became law, when it was ratified in December of 1865. So I throw those dates out. And I know I got kind of long-winded there, but that's to me, it's a Juneteenth story because it's up to us. We can choose December the 6th, June the 19th, 16, 19, whatever date we decide on, that's our date. We decide that's our liberation date. And so now people can say, I'm aware of all these other dates and other things that have happened, but we choose June 19th as our celebration date of our freedom in this country away from slavery. And when you know that history, and when you're backed up by those facts, nobody can question you and then talk about whether or not Juneteenth is a valid day to celebrate.
Yeah, I'm glad you gave that history, Val. Reverend Patterson, as you hear that history, one of the things that we're keenly aware of is that things still need to change. We still have some trouble. You know, the Floyd family are friends of this program. They've been on a number of times. I grew up with some of the Floyds here in North Carolina, and I count them as friends. And The whole thing with George Floyd, and then just recently the shooting in Buffalo, and then, there's still a lot of trouble here in the United States of America. As a minister, how do you talk to folks about still being hopeful in the midst of the trouble that we're still in? That's your job, to comfort people. So what's your message for this Juneteenth in the midst of all that stuff like Buffalo?
We were just studying some of that in Bible study. And, it took children of Israel 40 years to get through what was an 11-day journey. And sometimes God has to take us the rough road so that we will know that he was in control, so that we will know that it wasn't our doing, but his doing. A lot of times we murmur and complain, but we don't put any action behind our murmuring and our complaining. We don't go out to the polls to vote. We don't become active in the political arena. We don't go to the town hall meetings. We don't attend, meetings of importance in our community. Therefore, our voice is not heard. And so what I will say to that is that I have to continue to give to the congregation the hope that God has not forgotten. We stand on the promises that he's given to us. He said he would never leave us nor forsake us. And so I stand on those promises. I give people hope. George Floyd's brother's father-in-law lives next door to my daughter. And so I was able to see the family and to pray with the family through all of that ordeal, letting them know that yes, George was not here any longer, but God would take care of them. And so now laws are being passed that chokeholds cannot any longer be part of their tactics. And so although sometimes we lose what the human side of us might think that we're losing the battle, God is teaching us lessons. And if we would just build and grow upon the experiences that we're having, faith without works is dead. So if you don't work, then there's nothing that's going to be accomplished. God, that poem that says, when I was weak and I only saw 1 foot of footprints in the sand, what was going on? He said, that was then that I was carrying you. And so we have to realize that things are happening in this country that seem that God is not there with us. But we have to have that blessed assurance that he is walking with us, letting us know that their living is not in vain, letting us know that our suffering is not in vain. He says, they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. And if we will begin to take action, I know that he will renew our strength. He has not brought us this far to leave us. Martin Luther King had to lose his life for the dream. Malcolm X lost his life for the fight. And so sometimes there has to be bloodshed, but know that God is building up a generation of people that can stand on his word, but we've got to be active, proactive, and not reactive.
Well, I think that's a good way for us to end it with Reverend Lynette Patterson. I thank you so much for taking the time to come. Like I said, I've been in that sanctuary at your church, and I hope to come back again to Galveston, because it meant so much for me to be down there during Hurricane Ike and meeting the people there, just the nicest folks. And they treated me with such love and care, and I was able to spend a Juneteenth there, and it really impacted my life. So is there any final words you want to say? Tell us about the stuff that's going on in Galveston in the next day or two.
Let me tell you what we've got going on here at Reedy Chapel. And so we do welcome anyone that wants to come to Reedy. Our doors are always open. On Sunday, June the 19th, we will have a spirit-filled worship experience at 11 a.m., followed by a block party from 1 to 6. It's open to the community. There's food trucks and vendors and activities for one and all. I know it's Father's Day, so come on out, dads, with your children and enjoy with our hula hoop and bingo. And it's supposed to be hot, but we're gonna charge on through. At 3:30, if you ride a motorcycle, we're having a motorcycle bike blessing. We want God to go with you as you turn those handles and on two wheels. We want God's blessing to be with you. And then at 6 p.m., we will do the reenactment of the Emancipation March. So we will gather on the courthouse steps. We will read the Emancipation Proclamation, and then we will jubilantly walk back to Reedy Chapel AME Church, singing hymns, African drums, being led by a flag, a Juneteenth flag, and a United States flag. We'll be back to Reedy to continue our block party and the rest of our festivities. So if you're in the area, if you're in Galveston or anywhere near Galveston, make your way to Reedy Chapel AME Church.
Well, there you go. Get to Reedy Chapel. And Reverend Patterson, again, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, Val and I are going to finish talking about the news for the rest of the week. And Godspeed to the folks at Reedy Chapel and everybody in Galveston. We'll be right back after this message.
I don't remember how it started.
Go to that.
Our back and forth. It always came back. Dad! You probably don't remember what you told me,
That was perfect.
but I heard every word.
Vote. So Eastman, if Merrick Garland actually decides to pursue a case, do you think John Eastman is in legal trouble?
Yes. John Eastman has some of the most exposure out of these sort of cadre of aides and lawyers. You know, the Pence folks, some of them testified about trying to be on, quote, team normal. Mm-hmm. I would just call that team lawful. And Eastman is part of team coup.
Right.
And he was told he needed a good effing criminal defense lawyer. He's taking the fifth, which legally is not to be held against him in court. But that, combined with him seeking a pardon, does raise the obvious conclusion that he himself thought he had criminal exposure. Pardons are for criminals.
Let's talk Ginny Thomas. In the news again yesterday. Now there's talk she may come testify before the committee. She talked to Eastman about this conspiracy, this coup attempt. She talked to Mark Meadows, of course. We knew about that. We also learned over the past week or so she reached out to state legislators, asking them to do something that would also be illegal, which is ignore what the voters in your state did. Instead, send an alternate group of delegates that would undermine the election's integrity.
And welcome back to our third and final segment of the deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. It is Saturday, June 18th, 2022. When we left, Val Atkinson was here, but he's not now. And the reason why he's not is he's without power. There was a terrible thunderstorm in central North Carolina, and still around 40,000 people are without power in North Carolina. And Val is one of those people who don't have power. But guess what? Guess who we found? We found Dr. Nicole McFarland from Fayetteville State University. And she so kindly stepped in this morning to finish up with us. Dr. McFarland, first, thanks for short notice getting on. And number two, welcome back to the deal.
Hi, it's good to be back.
Well, you know, in the clip coming in, we saw Joe Scarborough, who I have a whole bunch of problems with because I think he propped up Donald Trump during the election, but let's not talk about that. By giving him free airtime. And Ari Melber on MSNBC yesterday talking about this lawyer, John Eastman. John Eastman apparently was a clerk for Clarence Thomas for a long time, and he is very close friends with Jeannie Thomas, who is Clarence Thomas, the Supreme Court Justice's wife. And from the clip, it sounds like there is a very close connection to the point where Jeannie Thomas may be in some hot water, but more precisely, Mr. Eastman is in a lot of hot water because people told him over and over his scheme made no sense.
Count that had happened in Congress since the beginning of the country.
We examined the Electoral Count Act. We examined practice under the Electoral Count Act. And critically, no vice president in 230 years of history had ever claimed to have that kind of authority, hadn't claimed authority to reject electoral votes, had not claimed authority to return electoral votes back to the states. In the entire history of the United States, not once had a joint session ever returned electoral votes back to the states to be counted.
First, let's just start with the basics here. These hearings, you know, I'm not sure how many people are watching. It's kind of difficult to get through some of it or whatever because it gets into weeds. But if you just pull back and let's just start with this Eastman thing, what about this relationship between this attorney and a Supreme Court justice's wife and the kind of things she was doing to try to get him to tell Donald Trump about how to basically have a coup? I don't know how else to say it.
Yeah, team coup, team abnormal, whatever you want to call it. Team illegal. It's shameful that she actually has been. It shows that she's almost been like the puppeteer behind a lot of Clarence Thomas's decisions. The fact that she's such an activist and has been over the years, which really does break the norm of so many Supreme Court justices' spouses, and the fact that then she takes such an active role in this particular effort to actually go out of her way to contact 29 different lawmakers, right, across the country, Arizona, Georgia, Mississippi,
Pennsylvania,
Michigan, Wisconsin, all pretty, so many states. The fact that she goes out of her way to try to change, to pull the levers behind the scenes, and then in her letter, her emails to Eastman, she actually refers to her husband, Clarence Thomas, as a close friend. She refers to her husband as a close friend, that her close friend is intrigued with Trump's effort to overturn the election. Now, what that says is that she already has some kind of, they're already cooking something, cooking the books. They're already behind the scenes, trying to engineer a situation where it goes to the Supreme Court, where Clarence Thomas can change the outcome or try to just bring it there and try to change the outcome behind the scenes. And activists and lobbyists behind the scenes can do things like Ginny Thomas. And then just the and then the idea that Clarence Thomas was the only person on the Supreme Court who did not want to have the January 6th hearings, because I guess clearly he was afraid that all of his wife's involvement and his personal compromise, the fact he's compromised would come out. He should recuse himself, and he hasn't. That's the problem. And he should really be impeached.
Well, yeah, and I'm glad you bring that up, because that is the only route that you can take with a Supreme Court justice. If you go look at the Constitution, one of the many flaws in it, I know people keep talking about is the greatest document ever written. I don't think so. I think there's a lot of flaws. It does not address what you do when you got a Supreme Court justice other than try to impeach them. Now, how do you impeach somebody in the United States? Well, you have a trial in the Senate, right? And you got to get 2/3 of the people to vote to throw them out. We can't even get 2/3 of the people in the Senate to decide on any damn thing, let alone impeach Clarence Thomas, because that would mean that Joe Biden would have another appointee to the Supreme Court. And Mitch McConnell's not going to let that happen, right? We know that's not a real thing that's going to happen here. I guess what I would ask you then is, are we really in as much trouble as I think we are? I know we've been through a civil war. There's been a war against Black people for the whole time we've been here. You could lynch and hang Black people with impunity up until just recently. We still got a lot of trouble here. America's never been a perfect place, but is there a problem here with our democracy in particular, where there's still enough people who would follow a Donald Trump? The fact he got elected in the first place shows you that there's enough people here Who,
And then a lot of people want to reelect him.
who would reelect him?
Tim Scott, case in point yesterday. I don't know. I don't know if you want to show
Well,
that.
because you bringing it up, we'll show that clip, and then it's a short clip, so we'll show that, and then we'll talk about it.
Give me my mean tweets and $2 gallon of gas.
Chris, you know, there's
So it's real short. Tim Scott says, "Hey, I'll take $2 gas prices in mean tweets, and I'll take Donald Trump back." This is Dr. McFarland. This is a black senator from the state that started the Civil War, saying that he'd rather have Donald Trump in light of what we just saw
South Carolina.
from South Carolina.
Expression from South. You ever hear the saying about South Carolina politics? Too big to be too small to be its own country, too big to be an insane asylum. and that's, to me, that encapsulates South Carolina politics. If you even just look at Tim Scott and his senior colleague, Lindsey Graham, that tells you a lot right there. I mean, just the fact that they're both like confirmed bachelors from South Carolina and Republican bachelors at that. And just the idea already shows that they're willing to go along with politics that don't necessarily align, you know, with their identities necessarily or their interests as people, but they're more concerned with how they, what their pocketbooks are like, you know, whether or not, you know, they're aligned, their interests align with their pocketbooks and their ability to wield power, tyrannical power. I would even call it was beyond hypocritical power, because tyranny is when you have laws, hypocritical is when you say something and then you do the opposite. But tyranny is when you say something, but then it's only for other people, but not for you, right? Like those rules apply to you, but not to me. So like that's how Tim Scott is. And I think it's probably going to work because like, what do we have right now? We have in the, we just had the congressional primary in South Carolina this past week. He was John Clyburn was challenged by two other pretty marginal candidates. He took away everything, but it was the first time in 20 years or so that he's ever put out billboards, that he's ever done ads. So maybe he does feel there's a concern, but you know, he's got it locked and he's going to be there until he retires and he christens an heir apparent. But we are really in a state of crisis, our democracy in general, when the right has such blatant miscarriage of justice and such blatant disregard for democracy, and where you have on the left where they pretend as though they care about democracy and justice, but neither one really do anything about it because they're all millionaires.
Well, let's talk about that before we run out of time. The hearings themselves, the 1-6 hearings. Again, I think they're important to have. I think the truth needs to come out or whatever. One of the flaws that I see is, again, how do you maintain people's attention? If you remember, 50 years ago, yesterday was the anniversary of the break-in at the Watergate. In those hearings, well, shoot, everybody watched them because one, there wasn't so many distractions going on, right? You didn't have all these different places. So PBS played those hearings in their entirety during the day, would replay them at night, and then all the networks would either play pieces of it and they certainly gave it wide coverage. There's one network here in America that won't cover them at all, which is Fox News, which is the one place that should be covering it. What do you think about the Democrats' ability, or should they even worry about it, trying to get to some of these people on the right to show them exactly what happened? Because don't they really know what happened? These people on the far right.
And people, yeah, and the problem, the sticking point is, we know what happened, but very few people care what happened, right? And the Democrats, their the assignment was for them to get people to care what happened. And as much as they touted, the primetime hearings and the primetime, what's the prime time now? Like, it just shows the leadership is so out of touch. The fact that they think people sit down at 8 o'clock and watch anything. I mean, you watch things when you watch them, you catch them on your phone. I remember even the Cohen hearings, the Michael Cohen hearings. People were watching that in Starbucks on their phones in the middle of the day. That had more cover. I think more people were paying attention to that than these actually. And I think that they should have done it in the middle of the day. I think they should have just done it. It should have been, they should have dragged it out an all day long thing. So it would just keep breaking into people's day. I think instead of trying to truncate it into a prime time slot, which is ridiculous. I just think they're so out of touch. They're just, I don't know if they're aware of new media habits and how American consumers, citizens, viewers are seeing politics. And if it wasn't going to be a lot of explosive, I think also because the fact that they put in clips, the clips weren't explosive. I think it should have been, the theater wasn't, it wasn't as high and as dramatic as people would have liked.
Well, maybe they should have called you. Maybe the mistake is, I think they probably went to the usual sources and did not look at that new media way of doing things, right? I mean,
no, they do. They're just not listening to. They're not listening to the squad. They're not listening to people who know how to use media. They are simply just not paying attention to them, and they're just doing things the old way. And they are still listening to the Nancy Pelosi's, the Clyburns, and the Schumers, and well, he's the Senate, but and Schiff. The old guard are still very much in charge, and they are still calling the shots. And I don't think that they have a handle on what Americans care about. Americans are only caring right now about how much gas prices cost, and the price of chicken, and the price of eggs, and the price of milk, and basically how are they going to feed their children this summer when they're not going to school.
Yeah, well, that's a good point. Let's make a shift here. And talk about Juneteenth before we end up in the first segment, which you did not get to see yet. We had, or second segment, I'm sorry, we had Reverend Patterson from Reedy Chapel, AME Zion Church in Galveston, Texas, because that's where Juneteenth started, in Galveston. And one of the issues we talked about with the Reverend was that Galveston is changing. One of the things that happened after Hurricane Ike was they started condemning a lot of Black property. And consequently, that's led to gentrification in Galveston. So the population is almost 50% down from where it was, probably in the 70s. And so, you have this town that's so tied to Juneteenth, so tied to Black history. Reedy Chapel was the first AME church west of the Mississippi. Galveston had the first Black school west of the Mississippi. The first Black doctors trained west of the Mississippi were trained in Galveston. So you get this theme. Jack Johnson was born in Galveston, and now you got this shrinking population of African Americans in a place like Galveston. Talk to me real quick about. Let's talk about some history a little bit. I am very appreciative that Juneteenth is a recognized holiday, but we had been celebrating it all along. It was like a known unknown. You know what I'm saying? And then you saw
soda.
Yeah, but now you see these commercial endeavors. I'm sure you saw where Walmart tried to have some Juneteenth ice cream, and people have tried to commercialize it. What do you think about the potential for this just being run over and made into something completely different than what it's supposed to be?
Well, I think what happens is it's going to be watered down. That's what happens when the sustained, specific cultural efforts of Black people enter the mainstream becomes watered down. That's to be expected. I still think it's personal. It's meaningful. if you have a personal connection, if culturally your family, has been celebrating it, if you've been paying attention to it all along, I think all of a sudden to make it a holiday, I think some people will start to reflect and think about its significance. However, we have to also consider the fact that the significance of it is limited because this is just symbolic. I think that Joe Biden has a long way to go, much further. Go Joe. He has a much further way to go before he satisfies Black voters, and we're satisfied, especially these midterm elections coming up. But then I don't know how motivated people are going to be just because they got to celebrate Juneteenth. He has to do more. And these efforts like to alleviate student debt, not totally forgive it, but it seems like it's more leaning towards some type of, forgiveness of maybe $10,000 or something like that, and alleviate it. It's not, but there's still efforts that are aimed at the entire population, right? So it's not it's still watered down. The anti-Asian hate bill, a lot of efforts to support, immigration. But I think that wasn't it the executive order for the Emmett Till, Anti-Lynching Act occurred?
Yeah.
That 150, which the anti-lynching bill, that was like 150 years in the making, I think, like that, and it's just.
Yeah, it took a long time to say that lynching should be a bad thing,
But they still haven't even charged the Buffalo shooter with lynching, right? Like, wasn't it?
Now he's been charged with a lot of things, but lynching.
But the point is, though, that I think that Black voters, African American voters, have to get something specific for us more than symbolic holidays, to really bring us to the polls, because I really think that even though Tim Scott is a Republican, I do think that I'm not going to be surprised. Don't be surprised if in 2 to 3 years, you see Black people at the Trump rallies, more than just the guy, Trump's Black, with the white shirt from the Hebrew Israelites, more than I do, saying, build that wall, build that wall. And I think that people really like they wanted those PPE loan scams to go on forever. And under Trump, that's possible. I'm just saying, right? And people are going to start, they're armed. People want their guns. Black people want their guns. White people want their guns. Black people want their gas lowered, and white people want their gas lowered. Like, it is just, Trump is really, I think he's hitting a sweet spot in the American ethos of like rugged individualism and just me, and like my little spot in the sunshine politics.
Yeah.
And, I think that Biden is I don't know.
Well, I hear you. Well, I don't want to run out of time, so I need to make sure we know what you're up to, and how we do at the end of every show. I ask you, what do we got to look forward to? What do you want to tell us about anything? What should we know?
I'm working on media projects about Black women and issues of colorism and texturism, and in how we teach writing and rhetoric. And I'm also just in general looking at how social media has impacted, and just visual medias in general, how are impacting how African Americans and people are having to view themselves and project themselves into the public sphere.
Well, that's great. And I want to again thank you for short notice coming on this morning, and hopefully we'll get Val back in here next week, and hopefully you'll be back in here next week. Maybe we can rope you in next week, and we can catch up on everything. In the meantime, folks, go do something. Celebrate Juneteenth for the right reason, like Dr. McFarland was saying. If you've been celebrating it, keep doing it, because you were doing it for the right reason anyway, because you really believe that Joe Biden or nobody has to tell you to celebrate a holiday. The folks in Galveston were doing it for a long time before anybody else, and they were doing it for a reason, because it really meant something. And so please go participate in Juneteenth activities. Also, it's Father's Day tomorrow. I'm a dad, so hopefully my kids will call me. They still love me enough to call me. And I know you had something else you wanted to add, Dr. McFarland.
Yeah, so Juneteenth, also, here's another thing I want to just add. In order to celebrate Juneteenth, people have to feel free.
There you go.
And if that's important. We have to just feel, we have to feel that we have that freedom, and we have to feel that it's real. It has to be substantive. So.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And like I said, we want to thank Reverend Patterson from Reedy Chapel. I'll have a link to Reedy Chapel's website. They're chock full of history at Reedy Chapel in Galveston. When the Emancipation Proclamation was read on the courthouse steps, the next place they took the proclamation to was Reedy Chapel, and they nailed it to the door. So that's how important Reedy Chapel is. And we had the pastor from Reedy Chapel here on the deal. So that's how important the deal is, because we get important people here like Dr. McFarland and Reverend Patterson to talk about those issues. Please share this with other people. Now you can get us on Spotify, Anchor, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, you name it, Stitcher. Find us in all those places. So subscribe and get other people to subscribe. You can always get us at our website, thedealwithedclark.com. I'm threatening Dr. McFarland because she needs to start writing for the website. So we're going to make her do that. And then you can also catch us on Facebook and YouTube. So we're all over the place. There's no excuse. Tell people about us and come back next Saturday for another edition of The Deal. Thanks so much. Have a good Saturday.